Hi everybody, welcome back to the journey of my YouTube channel, and welcome back to my read along of the Iliad. I will post a link to the first video in this series. This is now part 2. So if you want to see the introduction to this series, then you can check out that video. If you want to check out why I'm doing this in the first place and kind of my goals for this series, then I will post a link to another video that I made about that. And with those things already established, I think we can jump right into talking about book 2 of the Iliad, which is essentially chapter 2. Just the chapters in this poem are called books. So the summary of what happens in book 2 is basically that Achilles' mom, Thetis, who is a sea goddess, goes up to Olympus and talks to Zeus, and she's like, my son is destined to have a short life. Can you please do something for him? So in response to that, Zeus sends a dream, which is capitalized because a dream is like kind of like a person. It's like a minor god or a spirit or something in the Iliad. So that's kind of interesting. Zeus sends a dream to Agamemnon to call him to rise up to battle against Troy. They're actually going to go attack them now. So Agamemnon summons all his forces from all over Greece, and they line up in a battle array against Troy's army, and then we get a little bit of the battle array of Troy's army as well. So this is that chapter or book of the Iliad where we get a very long list of all these people who are the commanders in the army and all the places in Greece where they come from and how many ships each group has. It's very long, and it is kind of boring for someone like me to read because I'm just like, okay, a lot of difficult to pronounce names and a lot of numbers that don't really mean anything to me and a lot of very minor characters who are probably not going to show up again in this story, or if they do, I'm not going to remember who they were because it's just going to be mentioning who they killed or who killed them. But on this read through, I was also thinking about how it details all of these little locations in Greece, and it talks about natural features of the land or whatever. Like, this is the place with all of the really pretty rivers, or this is the place with the mountains. And just thinking about that from the perspective of someone who lived in Greece at the time that this was being written down, that probably would have felt a lot more immediate. And just thinking about it from the perspective of this is their homeland and this is what they're fighting for, that made it make a little bit more sense to me. I don't know for sure if that was exactly what Homer intended all of those details to be about, but it did at least help me think in terms of, okay, this is why they're fighting, because they want to protect and honor their homeland. So I can see why that actually has meaning to them. And maybe if you came from one of these towns, then you kind of be like, yeah, that's my hometown, and we sent a hero into the Trojan War and he did all of these cool things. I could see that being like a hometown pride kind of thing, sort of like we do with football players or other athletes, people who go into the Olympics. We're like, yeah, they're from my state, they're from my city. So I wonder if that's kind of what's going on with this long list of all of the Greek heroes and where they come from. And then, yeah, we still have Achilles essentially protesting. He's sitting this battle out. He's like, well, you go attack Troy as much as you want to, but I am really angry and I'm not going to do it. And like I talked about in the last video, when you've been kind of roped into a war fighting for someone else and you don't really care about it, then I can see how that would make you pretty angry. And then there are other things that I talked about in the last video that also make him pretty angry. Another kind of general note about just the way the quote-unquote world building works in this book is that it's interesting how much the physical and the spiritual overlap. Like, there's Olympus, which is where the gods are, and there's down on earth, which is where the humans are, but there's just a lot of overlap. In book 2, we see Athena and Ares start fighting along with the mortals. Athena runs around stirring up soldiers, so she's very much in the middle of things. And just as kind of a random note, when it's going through all of the locations in Greece that the heroes come from, it mentions this one river that's like, it's a tributary of the river Styx. And I'm like, the Styx is in the underworld. Like, how is there a tributary of the Styx in just normal Greece where people live? But that's the worldview that this was written from. Another note about Agamemnon is that one thing that helps me sympathize with him a little bit more is how much he cares about Nestor, who is this really old man. He is a super experienced fighter, but he can't really fight anymore because he's too old. But he's basically the mentor figure, not to be confused with the Greek mythological character literally named Mentor. But Nestor is figuratively a mentor, and he is kind of a guide and a counselor And I just appreciate seeing how much Agamemnon cares about him, kind of as a father or a grandfather, because as I'll talk about more later, a lot of times in this story, people's worth is largely defined by how well they can throw a spear or how many people they've killed. And it's nice to see that Nestor is still seen as a valued and important part of the army, even though he can't contribute to the actual fighting anymore. We also in book 2 start to see how the Iliad talks about the Trojans, which is one of the most interesting things about this entire story to me. It really surprised me the first time I read this book that the Trojans are not at all portrayed as the bad guys. They are given just as much respect as the Greeks are, and they are not really presented as being in the wrong. It's not about go Greeks, they're the good guys, and the Trojans are so terrible, we have to kill them all. The Greeks probably get a little bit more attention than the Trojans, but the Trojans get a lot of attention too, and they very much get to tell their side of the story. So I find that really fascinating. And it mentions a lot of the Trojans who are killed individually. That's coming up a little bit later, but once it starts getting into like who died in the battle, there seems to be really just as much care about the Trojans who died as the Greeks who died. So it doesn't have the perspective that I expected from something this old, where I kind of thought it would be more purely tribal warfare, like they took what's ours and we deserve it, so we're taking it back. That's really not the attitude about this. So I find that really interesting. I kind of expect mythological epic battle stories to be about good versus evil, at least what the author saw as good versus evil, but this is much more presented as a contest between equals. It's much more like these people are really strong and these people are really strong. Who's gonna win? Because it really is kind of a toss up. They have pretty equal strength. They have pretty equal, I guess, morals. Neither one of them has particularly good morals, so they're pretty much on level ground on that front. And I am looking forward to getting into the parts of the story where we get to hear some more perspectives from the Trojans, because some of those parts get really interesting later on. Book 2 also has one of the most obviously funny parts of the Iliad, which I don't think I really would have caught the intentional humor of it if not for an introduction to the last version of the Iliad that I read. But there's this part where Agamemnon has had his dream, and so he's trying to stir up the troops to go to battle against Troy. So he tries this reverse psychology thing on them, where he gets up and gives this rousing speech about, like, there's no point in fighting Troy, we might as well just all go back home. And his expectations for all of his men to be like, no, we can't go home, we must fight, we must win. And so he gives this speech about, like, let's just go home, we might as well just give it up now. And all of the men just stampede to the ships and they stir up a dust cloud. All the men are like jumping in the ships and they're so ready to go home. And it is actually pretty hilarious if you understand what is going on in that part, and how it's supposed to be basically a slapstick comedy scene, and it's described in these really exaggerated metaphorical terms. And I also like how it humanizes these soldiers, because for the rest of the poem we're going to see them basically turn into killing machines. So it is nice to see them, at least at this point, think, let's just go home. Like, why are we here? Why are we fighting these people? Let's just go home and not worry about this whole battle anymore. And to some degree, it probably, would have been better if they had just done that. We wouldn't have had the rest of the story in that case. But it's very understandable why they would just be willing to abandon the battlefield at that point. So I just think that humanizes the soldiers, that they don't just want to go around killing Trojans. They also care about their homes and their families, and they would kind of just like to go back there instead of fighting this whole war. So that brings us up to book 3, which is one of the most interesting books of this whole poem to me. So in book 3, we see the battle actually start, and we meet Paris. Paris is the one who really started all of this trouble. So here's what happened. Agamemnon's brother Menelaus was married to Helen, who is, I think, a daughter of Zeus, so she's like very special and everybody wants her. And after they're married and have a daughter, this dude from Troy, Paris, shows up and convinces Helen to come back to Troy with him instead and be his wife. And so that's what kicked off this whole battle, is that the Greeks are like, no, you can't have her, she's ours. And the Trojans are like, no, you can't have her, she's ours now. So we finally get introduced to the person behind all of this misery, and he sees the Greeks charging and he absolutely turns and runs for it. He is just this absolute coward and he takes off, and he does not actually want to be in the battle that he has literally caused. So then his brother Hector, who is just a much more reasonable person overall, is like, dude, you can't just run away from this. You're the one who started this in the first place. You've got to deal with this. You need to just challenge Menelaus to one-on-one single combat. We don't need to have hundreds of people die in a war about this. You two just battle it out over Helen and let's be done. So then at least Paris does agree to that, and he challenges Menelaus to single combat. Menelaus is like, yeah, let's do it. So then they have this fight, and Menelaus wounds Paris. He doesn't kill him, and he doesn't get a chance to kill him because Aphrodite shows up and decides to spare his life. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. And then we see some stuff from Helen's perspective also, and she is just still not even sure what she wants. So this is a very interesting book because we get into some more of the family drama that is really at the heart of what is going on in this poem. So to dig in a little bit more, I remember from my first reading of this really not liking Paris, but he is even worse than I remembered. I kind of already mentioned that he just totally turns coward at the beginning, and he really should be taking responsibility for this whole situation. At the very least, he should be like trying to justify himself or something, but he's just trying to run away from the problems that he's caused. And what makes this even worse is that when he's talking to Hector about it, he is basically saying, but if I give Helen back, then I'll also have to give all her money and her stuff back. So it's like he's not even really worried about keeping his wife as much as he is worried about keeping all of her stuff and all of her status and the bragging rights that he gets from having her. And then just to make things worse, he absolutely fails in the duel too. Like that's not a moral problem, which some people in this story kind of seem to think it is. Like if you can't throw a spear as well as someone else, then you are not as good of a person. So not to say that, but it just makes him even more pitiful that he like can't even do very much in a fight. So this is one of those literary characters who is kind of fun to hate on just because he is such a mess. And like I said, we also get to meet Hector, who really comes in as being pretty harsh. he like has some harsh words for his brother in this, but he's also right, and he recognizes what Paris doesn't recognize, that Paris is responsible for all of this, and that he should really be the one to set this right instead of making tons of people die about it. So Hector is clearly the far more responsible brother. He has been my favorite character from the Iliad, I think, the whole time, so we'll see if that continues to be the case for the rest of the story. But he's like just trying to figure out a way to solve this conflict that won't kill hundreds of people, and he really digs into Paris with like, you started this, you didn't have to start this. So I just appreciate that he is calling Paris out on what actually happened here, and the fact that this war is not necessary and it should be much more resolvable than it is. And then definitely one of the most interesting characters that we've gotten to spend time with yet in the Iliad is Helen, where we actually get to see her side of the story. And I was surprised how much more I sympathize with her this time, even though like she has made some pretty bad decisions, because this section from her perspective is all about her realizing that she has kind of messed up her life, because we see her like looking out from the city on the battlefield and being like, oh, I recognize this guy and this guy and this guy, like all of these people who have come to fight and battle are her friends. She knows all of them, and she's kind of like, well, I sort of led them to their deaths by starting this conflict. And she's thinking about how she left her daughter behind in Greece, she ditched her husband in Greece, and yet it's not this just easy, simple situation to get out of. It's not like she can just leave and go back, because now she's very high in the city of Troy. She's a big deal there, and she realizes if she goes back, then she's going to bring dishonor and trouble on this whole city that she's now been living in for a while. And it's not like Paris is just going to let her wander back to the Greeks because she wants to. Paris is not going to let her just make whatever choice she wants to make. So she has really kind of made a mess of things, and there is no simple way to resolve it, and she recognizes that. And it's sad to see her feel so hopeless about that. She just feels like there's nothing that she can really do at this point. There's no way out. She's not even sure what she wants to do. She's just very confused. And it is a little bit rough that everybody has been wanting to possess her for seemingly her whole life. I'm pretty sure there are even stories about like when Helen was young, people were already like kidnapping her just because they wanted to have her, and that would really be pretty miserable, and I can understand why Helen would be angry, going back to the theme of the poem is rage. She's mad at herself, she's mad at the people who have tempted her to get in this situation, and the people who are making it so hard for her to get out of this situation. And like, nobody will let the past go. Everybody has to do something about the fact that Helen is now living in Troy. So I don't remember exactly what happens with her later in the poem, and I am interested to see what that is again, because like, I kind of wish there would be some way for her to like have a redemption arc or something, because she wants out of this bad situation. I think she recognizes that she's made mistakes. She wants to do something to repair them. She's just not sure how. So I hope at some point she gets a chance to like do something a little bit better, because I think she wants to. So basically, I think if this book had a title, it should be like Modern Family or something, because the family drama, the family dynamics being so messed up, like it happens. It feels like the kind of family situation that could very much still happen today, the kind of family situation that very much does still happen today. So it's really a very sad section of the story. And again, I don't remember all of the details of what happens later, so I'm like, man, I hope like something better comes out of some of this. And then for humor, really just the main thing that I found kind of funny from this book was Paris being terrible. His terribleness is kind of comical. I think it's supposed to be. I think especially him just like running away from the army at the beginning is very much supposed to be funny, and it kind of is, but again, like, it's so painful. So I'll try to keep an open mind to see if Paris ever has any redeeming qualities in this book. I don't remember him having any from the first time that I read it, but I will try to keep my eyes open for maybe some more backstory that will make him more sympathetic, or something. I will try not to just judge right up front, but so far, even though the Trojans are definitely not the bad guys, Paris is the bad guy in my mind. Okay, that was book 2 and book 3 of the Iliad. After this, I think these videos will start moving a lot faster. I'm not planning on making a video for every 2 books of the Iliad, although I guess if there's enough content, maybe I can do that. So let me know, do you want me to speed up, or do you want me to take more of a deep dive? But I think the books will start moving a lot faster once we get into the actual battle sections and everything. I just wanted to make sure that we talked about the characters in these first few books and really establish who they are and what's going on with them, and I think that will provide a good foundation for the rest of the story. So I hope you enjoyed that. Let me know what you're thinking of this series and how I can make it better, how I can improve with each video. So I really appreciate you watching this, and I will see you in the next video. Thanks for journeying with me. Bye!